Hi guys, now I want you to slowly close your eyes, take a deep breath. Imagine yourself in the misty streets of the Middle Ages, walking amid the creaking of horse-drawn carriages, the distant ringing of a church bell, and the smell of hay. It's as if you're traveling back in time. But this journey is not just an ordinary history lesson. No, tonight I will tell you about the most interesting, striking, and even slightly perverted kings. Because history is not just about great wars, magnificent palaces, or victory songs. There are also people's secret weaknesses, forbidden desires, and surprising habits. Don't worry, this story won't disturb you. On the contrary, it will gently make you laugh as it lulls you to sleep. You might be surprised. You might say, "No way." But in the end, you'll drift into a deep sleep, if you're ready. I'm taking you to the darkest, most entertaining rooms of the royal palaces. Imagine 14th century England. Westminster Palace's vast, echoing stone halls witnessed monarchy's unfolding drama. Crowns then were heavy burdens, laden with expectations of virtue, brilliance, and fearless leadership. Yet sometimes, even magnificent regalia rested upon a head harboring a peculiar disposition. Our focus drifts towards Edward II of England, a monarch whose reign was less a saga of grand conquests and more a curious, bewildering series of personal choices that truly vexed his kingdom. Edward inherited a throne from his formidable father, Edward I, Longshanks, a legendary figure of iron will. One might expect the son to inherit a similar thirst for battle and dedication to kingship, but history rarely follows such straightforward patterns. Edward, it seemed, had different priorities and interests that bewildered and ultimately frustrated his proud, traditional kingdom. Picture grave advisors, faces etched with state burdens, robes rustling as they approached their young king. They'd speak of Scottish raids, French treaties, unruly barons, and the need for justice. Edward, one can almost visualize him stifling a yawn, his gaze drifting towards a falcon or a new trinket from a favorite companion. He wasn't captivated by dusty laws or tiresome diplomacy. No, Edward preferred pursuits less conventionally regal. Imagine him not on a battlefield, but meticulously overseeing a new cottage's construction. One might even envision him directing stone placement, perhaps lending an unkingly hand. While peers honed jousting and swordplay, Edward, to his court's dismay, enjoyed humbler crafts. Ditch digging, hedging, thatching roofs, and even swimming. Yes, the King of England splashing contentedly in a secluded pond. While powerful nobles grimaced and whispered disapprovingly. It was as if the crown felt heavy, not from demands, but because it inconveniently got in the way of his true passions. A king finding more joy in manual labor than statecraft. For England's nobility, it was an unfathomable deviation. This unconventional penchant extended, most controversially, to his chosen companions. A king was expected to surround himself with wise counselors, hardened warriors, and devout clergymen. Edward, however, developed an intense fondness for a Gascon knight named Piers Gaveston. Gaveston, charismatic, handsome, and witty, appealed deeply to the king. But he was also arrogant, grasping for wealth and power, and crucially, an outsider to the high English nobility. Their bond was so deep it utterly baffled, infuriated, and alienated the powerful barons. Imagine the chilling whispers, the frustrated sighs of statesmen, the contemptuous glares at the audacious Gaveston, who wore the king's jewels and openly mocked powerful men, often giving them demeaning nicknames. Gaveston was more than a friend. He was Edward's sole confidant, closest companion, and seemingly the singular focus of all his affection and generosity. Edward, to his advisor's dismay, showered Gaveston with vast titles, lands, and immense wealth, elevating him to unprecedented power. He even made him Earl of Cornwall, a title traditionally reserved for royalty a blatant insult. To fuel their outrage, Edward entrusted Gaveston with the regency. When he went to France to marry Isabella, the beautiful and proud French princess, the nobility gasped, leaving the kingdom to a mere favorite, a foreign, corrupting influence. It challenged their privileges and traditional role. The barons, formidable men hardened by feudal power and warfare, found Edward's overwhelming devotion to Gaveston not just inappropriate, but dangerously detrimental to the kingdom's stability. They viewed Gaveston as a distracting, corrupting presence, pulling the king from duties, encouraging frivolous pursuits, and undermining their authority. They relentlessly demanded Gaveston's exile, sending him away only for Edward to cunningly find ways to bring his beloved companion back. This stubbornness regarding personal attachments was a testament to the king's nature. Each return was a stinging slap to the baronage, fueling resentment to a dangerous boiling point, threatening rebellion. This profound personal connection was seen by many as Edward's greatest perversion, not in a literal sense, but as a radical deviation from medieval kingship. King was expected to marry, produce heirs, and dedicate himself to his kingdom. Edward, it seemed, consistently placed personal affections above all else, to the dismay of those who believed in a king's solemn purpose. He preferred his favorites' easy company and jovial banter to the crown's weighty responsibilities, creating a chasm of mistrust and animosity with powerful subjects, a chasm that would prove fatally wide. Let your thoughts drift now to a medieval castle's vast, cold, echoing halls. Ancient stone walls absorbed centuries of secrets, power struggles, and frustrated ambition. Imagine flickering torchlight casting long, dancing shadows, hiding untold stories and simmering resentments. The air, heavy with wood smoke, damp earth, and the faint, unsettling odor of unspoken treachery, carried whispers of disgruntled nobles, their voices low, filled with growing frustration, anger, and dangerous plots against their wayward sovereign. One can almost feel the tangible tension as the king's unconventional choices clashed incessantly with his time's rigid expectations. It was a kingdom teetering on chaos, not from external threats, but from a king seemingly more interested in personal comfort than the demanding realities of his inherited throne, a king who simply refused to play by royal rules. The repeated cycles of Gaveston's exile and brazen returns became a recurring, almost farcical, yet deeply unsettling theme in Edward's tumultuous early reign. Each time Gaveston was sent away, barons breathed a sigh of relief, convinced the king had finally seen sense. But Edward, with persistent, childlike determination, always found a new loophole, a legalistic reason, an opportune moment to cunningly bring his beloved companion back, defying expectations and exacerbating noble ire. It was a relentless game of cat and mouse played out on medieval politics' grand, perilous stage, with the kingdom's very fate and stability hanging precariously. The king's unwavering, almost obsessive, personal devotion was increasingly seen as a profound weakness, a damning testament to his inability to prioritize the realm's crucial needs over his intensely personal desires. This deeply personal struggle, played out publicly, became an escalating spectacle, systematically undermining the crown's authority and legitimacy in the eyes of powerful subjects and common people alike. And what of his queen, Isabella, the beautiful and intelligent She-Wolf of France, as she would later be known, a name evoking chilling admiration and primal fear? Their marriage, a crucial political alliance for peace, initially seemed promising. But Edward's clear, almost singular devotion to Gaveston left Isabella increasingly neglected, publicly humiliated, and profoundly, dangerously resentful. Imagine the proud-spirited young queen, from Europe's most sophisticated court, constantly overlooked and brutally overshadowed by a mere upstart favorite, her rightful place beside her husband usurped by a man her husband clearly adored with an intensity she could not comprehend or forgive. Her initial, desperate attempts to mediate peace between Edward and his rebellious barons eventually turned to icy, simmering bitterness as she realized her own power, influence, and dignity were systematically undermined by Gaveston's audacious presence. This deep personal slight, this profound wound to her royal pride and strategic position would fester and grow, transforming her initial hurt into a formidable, vengeful force that would eventually turn with devastating power against the king himself, setting the stage for a dramatic, bloody, and unsettling climax that would shake the English monarchy's foundations. So, as we settle deeper into this captivating tale, observe discontent's subtle, insidious unfolding. It's not grand clashes yet, but the quiet, relentless erosion of loyalty, the slow, agonizing burning of resentment in powerful men's hearts, and, crucially, a queen scorned. Edward II's perversion, then, was not merely about his personal affections or unconventional hobbies. It was profoundly about his perceived, glaring failure to conform to the rigid, sacred, and indispensable role of a medieval king. He was expected to be a roaring lion, a beacon of strength, but he seemed content to be a gentle lamb, oblivious to dangers as he wandered off royal duty's prescribed path, absorbed in personal attachments trivial and offensive to his powerful subjects. This was his great, unwitting defiance, his passive yet profound challenge to medieval kingship's very fabric, a defiance that would ultimately lead to a tragic and unsettling end. Let the soft hum of history lull you now, whispers of ancient courts and gentle sighs of long-forgotten figures, as these unique monarchs' intricate narratives gently unfold. Simply absorb the serene atmosphere, the quiet drama, and the subtle currents of a world both strangely familiar and profoundly strange. We are silent observers, floating above complexities, finding solace and peace in gentle remembrance. Let your breath deepen, your shoulders relax, and your mind prepare for the gentle drift into dreams as Edward's curious story, a tale of unconventional choices and royal expectations, continues to unfold, not with tension, but with the quiet, soothing cadence of the past, guiding you softly towards slumber. As the echoes of Edward's peculiar reign gently fade into the tapestry of the past, let us now shift our gaze to another corner of England, to a time a century earlier, when the formidable Plantagenet dynasty held sway. This era presented its own unique cast of characters, and among them, one figure stands out with particular, undeniable notoriety: King John of England. His name, even today, is often whispered with a hint of disapproval, a collective historical sigh for a monarch whose reign was a fascinating blend of incompetence, paranoia, and a series of rather uncharming personal traits that left a lasting, unsavory impression. Imagine a king not celebrated for his chivalry or wisdom, but instead remembered for losing vast tracts of land, feuding with the powerful Pope, and most famously being compelled to sign a groundbreaking document that profoundly curtailed his own royal power. John was the youngest, and perhaps the least regarded son of the formidable Henry II and the iconic Eleanor of Aquitaine, born into a family brimming with exceptional talent and fiery personalities. Yet John seemed to inherit almost all of the family's pronounced vices with remarkably few redeeming qualities or political acumen. His elder brothers, including the legendary warrior king Richard the Lionheart, were renowned figures, celebrated for their martial prowess and statesmanship. John, however, earned the unfortunate and prophetic nickname Lackland even before he ascended to the throne, a reference to his initial lack of inherited territory. This early appellation served as a fitting foreshadowing of his later, truly significant, territorial losses across the English Channel. Picture, if you will, the court of King John. It was a place where suspicion hung heavy in the air, thicker than the smoke from the grand winter hearths. John was deeply, almost debilitatingly, paranoid, often perceiving elaborate plots and treacherous betrayals where perhaps there were none, and, in other instances, where there certainly were. His profound distrust extended to almost everyone within his inner circle, particularly to his powerful barons, whose loyalty he perpetually questioned. This consuming paranoia often led to erratic, impulsive, and often cruel decisions, which did little to endear him to his influential landowning subjects. Imagine a baron summoned unexpectedly to the royal court, never quite certain if he would return home with new favors or find himself abruptly imprisoned, his family holdings confiscated without due process. This constant, unsettling uncertainty bred deep-seated fear and festering resentment throughout the realm. Fear, as history repeatedly teaches us, is a fickle and unstable foundation for a loyal kingdom. John's financial dealings were another prominent source of his infamous reputation. He was notoriously, almost comically, greedy, constantly devising new and astonishingly inventive ways to extract every last penny from his beleaguered subjects. He would impose exorbitant taxes, demand massive, often crippling fees for the slightest royal favor, and even, at times, resort to holding noble families to ransom for their own safety. Imagine the collective sigh of weary resignation that would pass through a village when news arrived of yet another of King John's innovative and utterly burdensome fundraising schemes. He extorted vast sums from Jewish communities, systematically seized valuable church property, and imposed cripplingly heavy scutage on his barons, all in a desperate and largely unsuccessful bid to finance his disastrous military campaigns in France. His financial policies were so arbitrary, so transparently rapacious, and so ruthlessly enforced that they alienated almost every segment of English society, from the wealthiest barons to the commoners. Beyond his political failings and incessant financial machinations, King John possessed a personal character that cemented his perverted reputation. He was known for his capricious and chilling cruelty, a trait that manifested in truly disturbing ways. Tales abound of his vindictiveness. A particularly chilling story involves the family of William Depraved, a powerful baron who fell out of favor. John, in an act of petty yet horrifying revenge, allegedly starved Depraved's innocent wife and eldest son to death in a Windsor Castle dungeon. Imagine the slow, creeping dread of those who knew John, keenly aware that a simple disagreement could lead to such a horrific fate for their loved ones. This casual, almost indifferent brutality, wielded by the very hand meant to uphold justice, was deeply unsettling to his contemporaries and remains a profound stain on his historical legacy. He was also known for his unapologetic debauchery and rampant lechery. While medieval kings were certainly not puritanical, John's alleged promiscuity went significantly beyond accepted norms, often involving married noblewomen from powerful families. These indiscretions weren't just personal vices. They were profound and public insults to influential families, systematically eroding loyalty and fueling anger that would eventually boil over into outright rebellion. Imagine the indignant outrage of a powerful noble whose wife or daughter had been targeted by the king. An act that not only brought irreparable dishonor, but also fundamentally threatened feudal society, which relied heavily on family honor. These deeply personal affronts, combined with his crushing taxation and arbitrary rule, created a potent and explosive cocktail of resentment that simmered dangerously beneath his beleaguered kingdom. This volatile combination of treachery, incompetence, insatiable greed, and profound personal depravity culminated in one of the most significant and enduring events in all of English history: the dramatic signing of Magna Carta in 1215. Faced with a widespread and determined rebellion of his exasperated barons who could no longer tolerate his capricious rule, John was reluctantly forced to meet them on the sprawling fields of Runnymede. There, under immense, undeniable pressure and with palpable reluctance, he grudgingly affixed his royal seal to a document that for the very first time formally and explicitly limited the absolute power of the English monarch and established certain fundamental rights for his subjects. It was an utterly humiliating public moment for a king who had so firmly believed in his absolute divine right to rule, a stark and public acknowledgement that even a king was ultimately subject to the overarching law and crucially to the collective will of his most powerful subjects. This transformative document, born out of deep-seated resentment and a desperate, urgent need to curb John's relentless excesses, became against all odds a cornerstone of constitutional law, a sprawling legacy far greater and infinitely more enduring than the king himself could ever have imagined. So, as the quiet of the night deepens, let the fascinating and cautionary story of King John drift softly through your mind. He was a king whose tumultuous reign serves as a potent reminder that even those who wield the greatest earthly power can be tragically undone, not just by formidable external foes, but far more often by their own profound character flaws, their own perversions of duty, honor, and basic human decency. His story, despite its darker and more unsettling elements, can serve as a gentle yet powerful reminder of the enduring importance of trust, fairness, and the sometimes reluctant, yet inevitable march of human progress, even when such progress is inadvertently driven by the most unsavory and unexpected of kings. Let the soft hum of history lull you now, the whispers of ancient courts and the gentle sighs of long-forgotten figures. As the intricate narratives of these unique monarchs gently unfold, allow yourself to simply absorb the serene atmosphere, the quiet drama, and the subtle underlying currents of a world both strangely familiar and profoundly strange. We are simply silent observers, floating above complexities, finding solace and peace in gentle remembrance. Let your breath deepen, your shoulders relax, and your mind prepare for the gentle drift into dreams as John's curious story, a tale of unconventional choices and royal expectations, continues to unfold, not with tension, but with the quiet, soothing cadence of the past, guiding you softly towards slumber. As the echoes of King John's turbulent reign and Edward-esque curious choices begin to blend into the soothing hum of history, let us now travel further back in time to an era that still captivates imaginations with its grandeur and its undeniable complexities. We journey to the heart of the Roman Empire, to a name that resonates with both immense power and an equally immense, often theatrical, notoriety. Nero Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, more commonly known simply as Nero. His reign, spanning from 54 to 68 AD, was a period of both profound cultural flourishing and deeply unsettling tyrannical excess. A truly fascinating chapter in the annals of imperial perversion. Imagine an emperor, not merely a ruler of a vast empire, but an artist, a musician, a poet, and an actor, who believed his true calling lay in the performing arts rather than the demanding responsibilities of statecraft. Nero was brought to power by his ambitious mother, Agrippina the Younger, a woman of formidable intellect and ruthless determination. Initially, his rule showed promise, guided by wise tutors like Seneca the Younger, the renowned Stoic philosopher, and the pragmatic Praetorian prefect, Burrus. The early years were marked by relatively just and efficient administration, a period often referred to as the Quinquennium Neronis, the 5 years of Nero, which were surprisingly well governed. However, as time wore on, Nero's artistic inclinations began to overshadow his imperial duties, and his youthful insecurities blossomed into a dangerous paranoia and an insatiable desire for absolute control. He developed a deep aversion to being advised or corrected, particularly by those who had initially guided him. His mother, Agrippina, who had meticulously orchestrated his rise to power, quickly became an obstacle to his unbridled authority. Imagine the chilling tension that must have filled the imperial palace as the son, now emperor, began to resent the very woman who had placed him on the throne. The whispers of Agrippina's perceived interference, her attempts to retain influence over her son, likely fueled Nero's growing megalomania. The eventual outcome was as tragic as it was ruthless. Agrippina was murdered on Nero's orders, an act that deeply shocked even the hardened Roman elite and forever stained Nero's reputation. But it was Nero's obsession with artistic performance that truly defined his unconventional reign. He viewed himself as a divinely inspired artist, superior to any professional performer. He would insist on performing publicly, singing, playing the lyre, and even competing in chariot races. Imagine the bewildered, perhaps even embarrassed, faces of Roman senators and generals, forced to attend the emperor's elaborate theatrical performances, clapping enthusiastically lest they incur his wrath. These performances were not merely hobbies. They were state affairs, demanding the full attention and forced adulation of his court and subjects. He even established the Neronia, a grand quinquennial festival of music, poetry, and athletics, modeled on the Greek Olympic Games, where he, naturally, was a prominent competitor and judge of his own talents. The public, who often enjoyed gladiatorial contests and spectacular triumphs, found their emperor's preference for singing and poetry rather bewildering, even undignified for a Roman ruler. The most infamous event of Nero's reign, and one that deeply contributed to his perverted image, was the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD. A devastating blaze swept through the city, destroying vast swaths of Rome. While modern historians generally agree Nero was likely not responsible for starting the fire, the rumors of his alleged culpability spread rapidly. The most damaging whisper, which persists to this day, was that Nero fiddled while Rome burned, supposedly playing his lyre and singing of the destruction of Troy from a vantage point. Consumed by artistic inspiration rather than imperial concern. Whether true or not, this rumor captured the essence of his public perception, a self-absorbed artist king, disconnected from the suffering of his people. Following the fire, Nero embarked on an ambitious and equally controversial building project, the Domus Aurea, or Golden House. This sprawling, opulent palace, covering an immense area of burnt-out Rome, is a testament to his extravagant tastes and his disregard for public sentiment. Imagine the collective frustration of the Roman populace, whose homes lay in ashes as their emperor constructed a colossal pleasure palace adorned with gold, jewels, and intricate frescoes. This grand, self-indulgent project further fueled public resentment and confirmed the growing perception of Nero as a detached, tyrannical figure, more concerned with his own aesthetic pleasures than the welfare of his empire. Nero's later years were marked by increasing paranoia, a series of purges against perceived enemies, and a descent into extreme cruelty. Philosophers, senators, and even his own family members were accused of treason and forced to commit suicide. His reign became a reign of terror, where suspicion led to immediate condemnation and justice was a forgotten concept. The cost of his extravagant lifestyle and his relentless building projects, coupled with the drain of continuous military campaigns, severely strained the Roman treasury. His fiscal policies became increasingly oppressive, echoing King John's desperate attempts to extract wealth from his subjects, further alienating the populace and the elite. Eventually, the unbearable pressures of his tyrannical rule, his financial excesses, and his perceived perversions of imperial duty led to widespread revolts. The governors of several provinces, including Gaul and Spain, rose in rebellion, declaring their opposition to Nero. The Praetorian Guard, whose loyalty was once absolute, abandoned him. Faced with an empire in open revolt and deserted by all, Nero fled Rome. The Senate, seizing the opportunity, declared him a public enemy. With no one left to turn to, and fearing a humiliating public execution, Nero committed suicide in 68 AD, allegedly with the dramatic last words, "Qualis artifex perio." What an artist dies in me. So, as the quiet of the night settles deeper around you, let the complex and often tragic story of Emperor Nero gently unfold in your mind. He was a ruler who believed his artistic genius outweighed his imperial responsibilities. A man whose personal perversions of duty led to the downfall of both himself and, temporarily, the stability of a vast empire. His reign stands as a powerful, albeit unsettling, reminder that the most profound forms of tyranny can sometimes emerge not from purely military might, but from unchecked ego, self-absorption, and a profound disconnection from the realities of governance and the needs of the people. Let the soft hum of history lull you now, the whispers of ancient courts and the gentle sighs of long-forgotten figures. As the intricate narratives of these unique monarchs gently unfold, allow yourself to simply absorb the serene atmosphere, the quiet drama, and the subtle underlying currents of a world both strangely familiar and profoundly strange. We are simply silent observers, floating above complexities, finding solace and peace in gentle remembrance. Let your breath deepen, your shoulders relax, and your mind prepare for the gentle drift into dreams, as Nero's curious story, a tale of unconventional choices and imperial expectations, continues to unfold, not with tension, but with the quiet, soothing cadence of the past, guiding you softly towards slumber. As the echoes of Nero's artistic reign and the Plantagenet struggles gently recede, let us drift further, not just through time, but across the vast expanse of oceans to a different continent, a different empire, yet one still steeped in ancient grandeur and its own unique set of royal eccentricities. We arrive now at the magnificent yet often complex court of the eccentric Ottoman Empire, focusing on a figure whose legacy is a complex tapestry of military might, administrative brilliance, and a chilling yet historically profound deviation from traditional succession practices. Sultan Mehmed III. His reign, spanning from 1595 to 1603, while relatively brief, was indelibly marked by an act that profoundly shaped the future of the Ottoman dynasty, reflecting a dark, yet in its context, strategically interpreted form of imperial perversion. Imagine a sultan not primarily remembered for grand conquests or sweeping reforms that define an era, but for an initial act upon his ascension that, to modern sensibilities, seems shockingly brutal, yet within the rigorous context of Ottoman dynastic survival, was considered by many a harsh, albeit necessary, imperative. Mehmed III ascended to the throne amidst the solemn clamor of tradition and the rigid, often unforgiving, expectations of imperial power. He was the eldest son of Sultan Murad III, and upon his father's death, the ancient yet deeply controversial Ottoman law of fratricide was invoked. This draconian law, often attributed to the formidable Mehmed the Conqueror, dictated with chilling clarity that for the ultimate stability and uninterrupted continuity of the burgeoning empire, all of a new sultan's brothers had to be executed without exception. This was to prevent the devastating civil wars and bitter succession disputes that had, in earlier centuries, threatened to tear the very fabric of the young empire apart. Picture the scene on that fateful day of Mehmed's ascension. The imperial palace, typically a place of opulent celebration, vibrant festivities, and joyous acclamations, must have been shrouded instead in a heavy, almost suffocating silence. Imagine the hushed whispers, the averted gazes of courtiers and dignitaries, as the grim, tragic procession of princes unfolded. Mehmed III, upholding this brutal and ancient tradition, ordered the execution of his 19 younger brothers. 19 innocent princes, some mere boys, Others on the cusp of young manhood were summarily put to death, their promising lives extinguished, all to secure the single, undisputed, and unchallengeable reign of the new sultan. This act, known as regicide of a particularly dynastic sort, was not driven by personal hatred, a whim of arbitrary cruelty, or individual malice. Instead, it was dictated by a cold, calculating, and ultimately pragmatic interpretation of state necessity and geopolitical survival. The empire had, in its tumultuous past, been grievously torn apart by bloody and destructive conflicts between rival princely claimants to the throne. And this drastic, irreversible measure was tragically seen as the bitter, yet essential medicine needed to prevent such internal strife from ever happening again. The reverberations of this mass execution must have rippled through the entire empire, inspiring a complex mix of both profound awe and palpable terror among its diverse populace. For the common people, it was a stark and undeniable reminder of the absolute unyielding power of the Sultan and the ruthless, often incomprehensible, logic of dynastic survival. For the ulema, the respected religious scholars, it was a practice endlessly debated in learned circles but largely sanctioned as a regrettable yet necessary means to prevent even greater bloodshed and anarchy within the Islamic realm. For the imperial family itself, it was a terrifying and ever-present tradition, a metaphorical sword perpetually hanging over the innocent heads of every male child born into the ruling house. Imagine the immense psychological toll on Mehmed himself, a young man scarcely prepared, yet forced to preside over such a brutal and unnatural act against his own flesh and blood. History offers tragically little insight into his personal feelings or internal struggles regarding this horrific event. But one can only assume the emotional and mental weight of such a monumental decision would have been immense, perhaps even crushing. This perversion of fundamental family bonds, however, was later replaced by another, perhaps less immediately bloody but equally impactful form of dynastic control: the infamous caliphs, or cage system. Mehmed III himself, after the initial mass fratricide that defined his ascension, was said to have abandoned the practice of widespread executions, perhaps due to the profound shock and public outcry it caused, or simply a pragmatic shift in evolving imperial policy. Instead of executing his male relatives, future sultans confined them to isolated, luxurious apartments within the labyrinthine confines of the Topkapi Palace. These princes, born as potential heirs to a vast and powerful empire, were condemned to live lives of gilded captivity, often for decades. Effectively deprived of the essential education, crucial military training, or any meaningful interaction with the outside world. Imagine a prince born with the destiny to rule, spending his entire life within the suffocating confines of a few richly decorated rooms, his only companions silent eunuchs and watchful concubines. His only connection to the vibrant outside world, the faint, distant sounds of the sprawling palace life. While the caste system successfully prevented direct fratricide and the bloody civil wars it aimed to avert, it inadvertently created its own insidious form of perversion for the dynasty. Princes, upon reluctantly ascending the throne after years of profound isolation, often tragically lacked practical experience in the complex art of governance, crucial military affairs, or intricate diplomacy. They were often ill-prepared for the immense and overwhelming responsibilities of the Sultanate, sometimes exhibiting pronounced mental instability, profound social awkwardness, or a deeply troubling detachment from the harsh realities of imperial rule. Imagine the stark contrast between the vibrant, politically astute, and experienced sultans of earlier eras who gained invaluable experience as provincial governors and military commanders, and these new, often fragile rulers emerging from a lifetime of gilded seclusion into the blinding, unforgiving light of absolute power. This practice, intended purely to ensure dynastic stability, inadvertently contributed to the gradual weakening of the imperial line and the insidious decline of the empire's overall leadership quality over subsequent generations. Mehmed III's reign was also marked by ongoing and costly military campaigns, particularly against the formidable Habsburg Empire in Hungary. A conflict notoriously known as the Long War. He inherited an imperial treasury severely strained by his father's lavish spending habits and the astronomical costs of maintaining a vast and expanding empire. His dedicated efforts to manage these crushing financial pressures, coupled with the drain of continuous military engagements on multiple fronts, meant that his relatively brief reign was one of constant struggle and disappointingly limited. Grand achievements forever overshadowed by the chilling memory of the early executions. He was a sultan who, after a traumatic and brutal start to his reign, largely delegated the day-to-day governance to his powerful grand viziers, perhaps due to the profound psychological impact of his violent ascension, or simply a pragmatic lack of sustained interest in the mundane yet essential affairs of state. So, as the quiet of the night settles deeper around you, let the complex, historically weighty, and profoundly significant story of Sultan Mehmed III gently unfold in your mind. He was a ruler whose tumultuous reign reminds us that the desperate preservation of power and the fragile stability of empires sometimes tragically involve choices that appear shockingly ruthless and morally reprehensible, yet are rooted in desperate attempts to prevent even greater chaos, bloodshed, and imperial fragmentation. His legacy indelibly marked by both the brutal act of fratricide and the subsequent, albeit less violent shift to the caliph's system, starkly illustrates how even profound deviations from typical family norms and human compassion can become ingrained practices, shaping the very nature of imperial rule and the long-term destinies of powerful dynasties. Let the soft hum of history lull you now, the whispers of ancient courts and the gentle sighs of long-forgotten figures. As the intricate narratives of these unique monarchs gently unfold, allow yourself to simply absorb the serene atmosphere, the quiet drama, and the subtle underlying currents of a world both strangely familiar and profoundly strange. We are simply silent observers, floating above complexities, finding solace and peace in gentle remembrance. Let your breath deepen, your shoulders relax, and your mind prepare for the gentle drift into dreams. As Mehmed's curious story, a tale of unconventional choices and imperial expectations, continues to unfold, not with tension, but with the quiet, soothing cadence of the past, guiding you softly toward slumber. As the echoes of the Ottoman court and the Plantagenet struggles gently recede, let us once again cast our minds back to the grandeur and the darker curiosities of the Roman Empire. We now turn our gaze to a figure whose name has become almost synonymous with tyrannical excess, shocking eccentricity, and a reign so utterly bizarre that it often blurs the lines between historical fact and dramatic legend. Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, universally known by his childhood nickname Caligula. His reign, brief yet unforgettable, from 37 to 41 AD, stands as a chilling testament to unchecked power and the chilling descent into what history has undeniably labeled as imperial perversion. Imagine an emperor, not merely a supreme commander or a wise administrator, but a man who seemingly delighted in pushing the boundaries of decency, rationality, and imperial authority to their absolute breaking point. Caligula was the great-grandson of Emperor Augustus and the son of the revered general Germanicus, making him a direct descendant of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, the very founders of the Roman Empire. Initially, his ascension was met with widespread joy and optimism. He was young, popular, and seemed to possess all the charm and charisma of his beloved father. He began his reign with acts of generosity, releasing prisoners, abolishing unpopular taxes, and recalling exiles. the Roman people truly believed a new golden age had dawned. However, this promising beginning quickly dissolved into a nightmare of unpredictable cruelty and self-indulgent madness. Historians debate the exact cause of his drastic change. Some suggest a severe illness early in his reign affected his mental state, while others point to the corrupting influence of absolute power on a naturally unstable personality. Regardless of the catalyst, Caligula rapidly transformed from a beloved prince into a terrifying tyrant, indulging in a series of acts that defied all Roman convention and decency. Picture the Roman Senate, the very backbone of the Republic, now subservient to an emperor. Forced to endure Caligula's increasingly outrageous demands and public humiliations, he frequently mocked and debased senators, forcing them to run for miles before his chariot or even act as his personal slaves. Imagine the collective horror and suppressed rage of these proud ancient families, accustomed to centuries of influence, now reduced to theatrical subservience. He demanded that statues of himself be erected throughout the empire and that he be worshipped as a living god, complete with his own temples and priests. This was a profound affront to Roman tradition, where emperors were typically deified only after their death. But it was Caligula's personal eccentricities and his profound disregard for public morality that truly defined his perverted reign. He was infamous for his sexual excesses, engaging in alleged incestuous relationships with his sisters and demanding that the wives of prominent senators and noblemen attend his banquets, where he would openly parade them or force them into degrading acts. These were not merely private indiscretions. They were public demonstrations of his absolute power and his contempt for the social norms and family honor that underpinned Roman society. Imagine the utter humiliation and burning resentment of those families whose wives and daughters were thus disgraced, fostering a deep-seated hatred that would ultimately seek retribution. His lavish spending was legendary, draining the imperial treasury with unprecedented speed. He built colossal pleasure barges, staged ridiculously extravagant games and gladiatorial contests, and hosted banquets where exotic animals were served on plates of gold. Imagine the Roman treasury, once robust, dwindling rapidly under the weight of an emperor's insatiable appetite for luxury and spectacle. To replenish his coffers, he resorted to ruthless extortion, levying arbitrary fines, confiscating property, and even operating a lavish brothel within the imperial palace, forcing noble women to participate. These financial abuses, reminiscent of King John's rapaciousness, fueled widespread discontent among all social classes. Perhaps the most iconic and comically absurd example of Caligula's perversion was his alleged intention to appoint his favorite horse, Incitatus, to the consulship. While historians debate whether this was a serious intent or a cruel joke, meant to mock the Senate, the very notion captured the essence of his contempt for tradition and his desire to demonstrate his absolute authority over even the most sacred Roman institutions. Imagine the hushed disbelief, the barely contained outrage, as whispers spread that the emperor might appoint a horse to one of the highest offices in the land. This act, whether literal or symbolic, was a profound insult to the Roman aristocracy and a chilling indicator of the emperor's deteriorating mental state. Caligula's paranoia also grew to terrifying proportions, saw enemies everywhere, executing perceived traitors on the flimsiest of pretexts. He delighted in watching tortures and executions, often prolonging the suffering of his victims for his perverse amusement. His famous phrase, "Oderant dum metuante," let them hate me, so long as they fear me, perfectly encapsulated his tyrannical philosophy. This reign of terror, combined with his financial recklessness and his public indecencies, eventually pushed the Roman elite to its breaking point. After just 4 years, Caligula's reign came to a brutal end. He was assassinated by a conspiracy of Praetorian guards and senators, led by Cassius Chaerea. The guards, tired of his insults and fearing for their own lives, ambushed him in a hidden corridor of the palace. His assassination was met with widespread relief throughout Rome, though it plunged the empire into a brief period of chaos before Claudius, Caligula's uncle, was eventually proclaimed emperor. So, as the quiet of the night deepens around you, let the turbulent and often unbelievable story of Emperor Caligula gently unfold in your mind. He was a ruler who demonstrated how unchecked power, combined with profound psychological instability, can lead to a reign of terror and shocking depravity. His story serves as a stark reminder that even within the most powerful empires, the perversions of a single individual can have devastating consequences, challenging all notions of order, decency, and governance. Let the soft hum of history lull you now, the whispers of ancient courts and the gentle sighs of long-forgotten figures, as the intricate narratives of these unique monarchs gently unfold. Allow yourself to simply absorb the serene atmosphere, the quiet drama, and the subtle underlying currents of a world both strangely familiar and profoundly strange. We are simply silent observers, floating above complexities, finding solace and peace in gentle remembrance. Let your breath deepen, your shoulders relax, and your mind prepare for the gentle drift into dreams as Caligula's curious story, a tale of unconventional choices and imperial expectations, continues to unfold, not with tension, but with the quiet, soothing cadence of the past, guiding you softly toward slumber. As the echoes of Roman imperial excesses and Ottoman dynastic complexities gently fade into the soothing hum of history, let us now journey eastward to a vast and often enigmatic land, to a different era, yet one still profoundly shaped by the whims and darkness of its rulers. We arrive now at the formidable court of Zottom of Russia, focusing on a figure whose name alone evokes a chilling blend of absolute power, brilliant political maneuvering, and terrifying unpredictable cruelty. Ivan IV Vasilievich, forever etched in history as Ivan the Terrible. His long reign, from 1547 to 1584, stands as a stark testament to the profound and destructive perversions that absolute authority can unleash upon a nation and its people. Imagine a czar, not merely a monarch, but a figure who consciously cultivated an image of divinely ordained, unchallengeable power, whose reign began with promising reforms but descended into a terrifying, almost theatrical, reign of terror. Ivan ascended to the throne at a young age, orphaned and raised in a court rife with brutal power struggles among the Bojar families. This traumatic childhood, marked by neglect, fear, and witnessing constant treachery, deeply scarred his psyche, fostering a profound paranoia and a relentless craving for absolute control. Initially, his rule was marked by significant reforms. He centralized power, reformed the military, codified laws, and expanded Russia's territory, earning him the title the Great. He even established the Zemsky Soper, a consultative assembly of nobles and clergy, and promoted trade with Western Europe. However, a profound shift occurred in Ivan's personality and rule after the death of his beloved first wife, Anastasia, in 1560. He suspected poisoning and plunged into a deep depression, from which he emerged as a different, darker ruler. His paranoia, always present, now consumed him. He became convinced that the boyars whom he had always distrusted were conspiring against him, seeking to undermine his authority and even claim his throne. Picture the chilling atmosphere of Ivan's court during this later period. It was a place where suspicion was a tangible presence, where a single misstep or perceived slight could lead to unimaginable torment and death. In 1565, Ivan instituted the Oprichnina, a terrifying policy designed to crush any perceived opposition and solidify his personal autocratic rule. He divided Russia into two parts, the Zemshina, governed by the traditional administration, and the Oprichnina, a vast personal domain directly controlled by the Tsar. For this latter territory, Ivan created the Oprichniki, his personal guard, a terrifying force of black-clad enforcers who rode black horses and carried brooms and dog heads on their saddles, symbolizing their mission to sweep away and gnaw out traitors. Imagine the sheer terror unleashed by these Oprichniki. They were Ivan's instruments of perversion, acting with complete impunity, seizing land, executing boyars, and torturing anyone suspected of disloyalty. Cities like Novgorod suffered horrific massacres, entire populations annihilated on mere suspicion of treason. Their methods were brutal and often theatrical. Victims were impaled, boiled alive, or torn apart by wild animals. These weren't isolated incidents. They were systematic campaigns of terror designed to break the will of the nobility and the populace, ensuring absolute obedience to the Tsar. The Oprichnina plunged Russia into a period of unprecedented internal turmoil, economic devastation, and widespread fear, fundamentally altering the relationship between the ruler and his subjects. Ivan's personal character, too, became increasingly volatile and cruel. He was known for sudden, violent outbursts, often followed by periods of intense piety and remorse. He would inflict torture himself, yet spend hours in prayer, confessing his sins and seeking divine forgiveness. This stark contradiction between extreme religious devotion and monstrous cruelty puzzled and terrified his contemporaries. He engaged in numerous marriages, often abandoning or imprisoning wives for trivial reasons, further highlighting his instability. His obsession with absolute power and his paranoia even extended to his own family. The most infamous and tragic act of his reign, a true perversion of parental love, was the murder of his own eldest son and heir, Ivan Ivanovich. In a fit of uncontrollable rage, allegedly during an argument about the young prince's wife, Ivan struck his son with his royal staff, delivering a fatal blow. Imagine the horror and despair of the Tsar upon realizing what he had done, the profound grief that would consume him for the rest of his life. This act extinguished the brightest hope for the Romanov dynasty, leaving a weaker, less capable heir, Fyodor, to succeed him. This single, devastating act encapsulated the self-destructive nature of Ivan's tyranny. The long-term impact of Ivan the Terrible's reign was profound. While he expanded Russian territory significantly, his brutal methods and the devastation of the Oprichnina left the country economically shattered and politically unstable. The flight of peasants from his tyrannical rule contributed to the later establishment of serfdom, trapping generations in bondage. His reign also laid the groundwork for the time of troubles, a period of intense political instability and civil war that followed the extinction of his dynasty. So, as the quiet of the night deepens around you, let the complex and often terrifying story of Ivan the Terrible gently unfold in your mind. He was a ruler who demonstrated how the trauma of childhood and the corrupting influence of unchecked power can combine to create a monstrous tyranny. His story serves as a chilling reminder that the perversions of a single individual at the pinnacle of power can have devastating, long-lasting consequences for an entire nation, leaving a legacy of fear, destruction, and profound historical scars. Let the soft hum of history lull you now, the whispers of ancient courts and the gentle sighs of long-forgotten figures. As the intricate narratives of these unique monarchs gently unfold, allow yourself to simply absorb the serene atmosphere, the quiet drama, and the subtle underlying currents of a world both strangely familiar and profoundly strange. We are simply silent observers, floating above complexities, finding solace and peace in gentle remembrance. Let your breath deepen, your shoulders relax, and your mind prepare for the gentle drift into dreams. As Ivan's curious story A tale of unconventional choices and imperial expectations continues to unfold, not with tension, but with the quiet, soothing cadence of the past, guiding you softly towards slumber. As the echoes of Russian Tsardom and Roman imperial madness gently recede into the soothing hum of history, let us now travel even further east to a land of ancient dynasties and profound cultural depth. We arrive at the heart of imperial China, to a figure whose story is one of unparalleled ambition, ruthless determination, and an astonishing, almost unprecedented ascent to ultimate power. Empress Wu Zetian. Her reign from 690 to 705 AD was a profound perversion of traditional patriarchal norms, as she, a woman, seized the dragon throne and ruled with an iron fist, leaving an indelible mark on Chinese history. Imagine an empress, not merely a consort or a regent, but a sovereign who dared to rule in her own right, challenging centuries of Confucian tradition that deemed women incapable of holding supreme power. Wu Zetian began her life not in the imperial household, but as a low-ranking concubine of Emperor Taizong, one of China's most revered rulers. Her early life in the palace was a harsh lesson in survival, cunning, and the intricate, often deadly politics of the imperial harem. She learned quickly, observing the power dynamics, studying statecraft, and mastering the art of manipulation. Upon Taizong's death, she was sent to a Buddhist convent, as was customary for concubines who had not borne children. But Wu Zetian was no ordinary woman. She was a force of nature, and destiny, it seemed, had far grander plans for her. Through sheer strategic brilliance and undeniable charm, she managed to re-enter the imperial court, captivating Taizong's successor, his son, Emperor Gaozong. She quickly rose through the ranks of the harem, outmaneuvering and eliminating rivals with a cold, calculated ruthlessness that would become her hallmark. Picture the chilling atmosphere of the imperial court as Wu Zetian consolidated her power. Whispers of her methods spread like wildfire. She was alleged to have murdered her own infant daughter to frame Empress Wang, Gaozong's primary wife, thereby securing her own position. While historians debate the truth of such sensational claims, the very existence of these rumors speaks to the terror she inspired. She systematically purged anyone perceived as an obstacle, ministers, nobles, and even members of the imperial family, often through exile, forced suicide, or execution. Imagine the fear in the hearts of those who dared to cross her, knowing her reach was absolute and her vengeance swift. As Gaozong's health declined, Wu Zetian effectively became the de facto ruler, issuing imperial decrees and making critical decisions. After his death, she installed two of her sons as emperors, first Zhongzong, then Rizong, but held the true reins of power as Empress Dowager. This was a perversion of male-dominated rule that the Confucian scholars found deeply unsettling. They protested, they conspired, but Wu Zetian crushed every challenge with unwavering resolve. She famously used a network of secret police and informants, creating a pervasive atmosphere of fear that ensured obedience. But Wu Zetian's reign was not simply one of terror. She was a highly capable and intelligent ruler. She reformed the civil service examination system, making it more meritocratic and open to commoners, thereby weakening the power of the old aristocracy. She expanded the empire's borders through military campaigns, particularly in Central Asia and Korea. She was a devout Buddhist, promoting the religion and commissioning magnificent Buddhist art and temples, including the famous Longman Grottos. Imagine her passion for governance and her strategic mind, defying every expectation of female leadership. She governed with a vision, overseeing a period of relative peace and economic prosperity, despite her brutal internal policies. Her ultimate act of perversion in the eyes of traditionalists came in 690 AD, when she cast aside the imperial regency and proclaimed herself the holy and divine emperor, establishing her own Zhou dynasty, usurping the Tang. This was an unprecedented move. Never before had a woman sat on the dragon throne as a reigning sovereign. She adopted male imperial robes, conducted court ceremonies with herself at the center, and even declared new characters for the Chinese script. She was not merely acting as a regent or a temporary placeholder. She was the emperor in every sense of the word. Imagine the shock, the outrage, and the grudging acceptance among a society utterly unprepared for a female emperor. Despite her achievements, the ruthlessness of her methods and her open challenge to patriarchal order ensured that her legacy would remain highly controversial. Later historians, predominantly male and Confucian, often portrayed her as a tyrannical usurper, highlighting her cruelty and excesses while downplaying her administrative successes. Yet, even her detractors could not erase the fact that she had ruled, and ruled effectively, for nearly 2 decades. Towards the end of her reign, in her late 70s, Wu Zixin's grip on power began to weaken. She became increasingly reliant on a few trusted favorites, including 2 young brothers, the Zhang brothers, whose influence grew unpopular. In 705 AD, a palace coup, led by disillusioned officials and imperial relatives, forced her to abdicate. She died shortly thereafter, leaving behind a complex legacy that continues to fascinate and divide. So, as the quiet of the night settles deeper around you, let the remarkable and often terrifying story of Empress Wu Zetian gently unfold in your mind. She was a ruler who defied every societal expectation, transforming herself from a mere concubine into a reigning emperor. Her story serves as a powerful reminder that perversion in the context of history can sometimes be the radical breaking of norms, a relentless pursuit of power, and an undeniable demonstration of will against the most entrenched traditions. Let the soft hum of history lull you now, the whispers of ancient courts and the gentle sighs of long-forgotten figures. As the intricate narratives of these unique monarchs gently unfold, allow yourself to simply absorb the serene atmosphere, the quiet drama, and the subtle underlying currents of a world both strangely familiar and profoundly strange. We are simply silent observers, floating above complexities, finding solace and peace in gentle remembrance. Let your breath deepen, your shoulders relax, and your mind prepare for the gentle drift into dreams, as Wu Zixin's curious story, a tale of unconventional choices and imperial expectations, continues to unfold, not with tension, but with the quiet, soothing cadence of the past, guiding you softly towards slumber, as the echoes of China's formidable Empress Wu and the Roman Emperor's eccentricities gently settle into the vast silence of history. Let us now journey to a land of ancient kingdoms and mythical tales, a place where royal bloodlines were intertwined with profound destinies. We arrive at the heart of ancient Egypt, to a figure whose name is synonymous with religious upheaval, artistic revolution, and a profound, yet often perplexing, deviation from millennia of tradition. Akhenaten, also known as Amenhotep IV. His reign around 1353 to 1336 BC was a truly remarkable perversion of established religious norms, a singular act of spiritual defiance that reshaped an empire, albeit briefly. Imagine a pharaoh, not merely a divine ruler, but a prophet, a revolutionary, who dared to dismantle the entire pantheon of traditional gods and impose a radical monotheistic worship upon his devout people. Akhenaten ascended the throne as Amenhotep IV, heir to a glorious lineage of powerful pharaohs. Egypt at this time was a land deeply rooted in polytheism, worshipping a vast array of gods, with Amun-Ra, the chief deity, holding supreme power and influence, particularly through his wealthy and influential priesthood at Thebes. The stability of the empire was intrinsically linked to this complex religious system. However, from early in his reign, Akhenaten displayed an unprecedented fascination with one particular deity, the Aten, the visible disk of the sun. This was not entirely new. The Aten was already a minor solar god, but Akhenaten elevated it to an exclusive, supreme position, proclaiming it the one true God, the sole creator and sustainer of the universe. This was a profound and shocking perversion of millennia of religious practice, a direct challenge to the very foundation of Egyptian belief and the immense power of the Amen priesthood. Picture the bewildered, perhaps even terrified, faces of the traditional priests and the populace as Akhenaten's reforms unfolded. He changed his name from Amenhotep to Akhenaten, explicitly severing his ties with the old god. He systematically defaced the names and images of other gods, especially Amen, from monuments across the land. Imagine the scale of such an undertaking, a systematic erasure of sacred history. He dissolved the traditional priesthoods, confiscated their vast estates, and redirected their wealth to his new cult of the Aten. This was not merely a theological shift. It was an aggressive, revolutionary, political, and economic upheaval, dismantling powerful institutions that had existed for centuries. His most audacious act of religious perversion was the construction of a brand new capital city dedicated entirely to the Aten, Akhetaten, known today as Amarna. Imagine the immense effort required to build a sprawling, magnificent city from scratch in the desert, a monumental testament to a single pharaoh's radical vision. This new city was a stark departure from traditional Egyptian urban planning, with open-air temples designed to directly worship the sun disk rather than the dark, enclosed sanctuaries of the older gods. Within this new city, Akhenaten fostered a revolutionary artistic style. Gone were the rigid, idealized depictions of pharaohs. In their place appeared a more naturalistic, even strangely elongated and exaggerated portrayal of the royal family. Akhenaten himself was depicted with a long face, narrow eyes, broad hips, and a somewhat pot-bellied physique. His beautiful chief consort, Queen Nefertiti, too, became an iconic figure of this new style. Imagine the shock of the royal sculptors and painters, suddenly ordered to abandon centuries of artistic convention for a bold, new aesthetic that celebrated realism, even to the point of showing the royal family in intimate, almost mundane poses. This Amarna style was another profound perversion of established artistic norms, reflecting Akhenaten's desire for complete break with the past. However, Akhenaten's radical reforms, while driven by profound conviction, came at a great cost. His intense focus on religious matters often led to neglect of foreign policy. The vast Egyptian empire, built by his predecessors, began to suffer. Correspondence from vassal states pleading for help against invading forces went largely unanswered. Imagine the growing frustration of loyal provincial governors and military commanders, left undefended by a pharaoh seemingly absorbed solely in theological pursuits. The economic life of Egypt, heavily reliant on the old temples and their land holdings, was also disrupted, leading to widespread discontent. The common people, too, struggled to adapt to the new abstract monotheism. They were accustomed to a pantheon of relatable gods, each with specific domains and festivals. The Aten, a singular, distant sun disk, felt remote and less accessible. Imagine the quiet confusion and spiritual longing of ordinary Egyptians whose millennial traditions were suddenly forbidden, their ancestral gods defaced and forgotten by royal decree. This disconnect between the pharaoh's radical vision and the deep-seated beliefs of his subjects created a fertile ground for resentment. Akhenaten's reign, despite its fascinating cultural and religious innovations, was ultimately short-lived and, in terms of political stability, largely unsuccessful. Following his death, his religious revolution was systematically dismantled. His son, the boy king Tutankhamun, soon changed his name to Tutankhamun, signaling a complete return to the old gods. The city of Amarna was abandoned, its temples demolished, and Akhenaten's name erased from official records, a deliberate act of historical perversion to undo his legacy. For centuries, he became known as the heretic king, a forgotten, reviled figure until modern archaeology rediscovered his story. So as the quiet of the night deepens around you, let the unique and historically significant story of Akhenaten gently unfold in your mind. He was a pharaoh whose profound spiritual conviction led him to challenge an entire civilization's most deeply held beliefs. A ruler whose perversion of religious norms, while perhaps an act of genuine faith, profoundly shook the very foundations of his empire. His reign stands as a powerful reminder that even the most radical vision, when imposed with absolute authority, and without the broader consent of a society, can be ultimately undone by the relentless pull of tradition and the resilience of ingrained beliefs. Let the soft hum of history lull you now, the whispers of ancient courts and the gentle sighs of long-forgotten figures. As the intricate narratives of these unique monarchs gently unfold, allow yourself to simply absorb the serene atmosphere, the quiet drama, and the subtle underlying currents of a world both strangely familiar and profoundly strange. We are simply silent observers, floating above complexities, finding solace and peace in gentle remembrance. Let your breath deepen, your shoulders relax, and your mind prepare for the gentle drift into dreams. As Akhenaten's curious story, a tale of unconventional choices and imperial expectations, concludes our journey through the sleep story of perverted kings, guiding you softly toward slumber.